Did you know that there's a part of your child's brain that controls everything from focus to self-control to emotional regulation? It's actually right here in the front part of the brain. It's called the frontal lobe, but more specifically the prefrontal cortex. The frontal lobe controls the skills we expect just about everyone to have, both kids and adults. Everything from sitting still to staying on a certain task to just thinking before you act or do something. And if that part of the brain is delayed with development, you're going to see that transfer over into the real world with things like ADHD, with trouble finishing tasks, to always being distracted, or just having big emotions over small things. But guys, I'm here to give you good news. The frontal lobe, like any part of the brain, can be strengthened. It can be strengthened the same way that we can strengthen a muscle. Let's talk about what the frontal lobe does, and 3 things that you guys can start doing today to help support it and to make it stronger. My name's Dr. Connor Bohr, and I run a pediatric neurodevelopmental clinic where we help kids with delays, with brain injuries, by looking how the brain is actually wired. So we take a whole body approach, and we don't want to just look at the symptoms that somebody has. And we've spent the last handful of years here helping families understand what's really going on beneath the surface. So if you feel like your child has something deeper going on, then you're in the right place. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about what the prefrontal cortex does for our brain and our body. What you have to remember is that our brain grows from the bottom up and then grows from the back to the front. So the last part of our brain to actually develop is our prefrontal cortex. A good way that a lot of people know this is you can't rent a car until you're 25 years old. That's because our brain is pretty much fully developed then, and we can make more wise decisions. And that's part of the reason and part of the excuse that some people have that teenagers, they make some more impulsive type decisions because the part of the brain that really regulates those decision-making skills isn't fully finished growing yet. So what the prefrontal cortex essentially does, it helps with executive function. So this is everything from attention to impulse control to emotions to memory to planning to just being flexible with your thinking. It keeps you away from being very rigid in the way that you think and the way that you act. Here's a good analogy that I like using. So think of our brain like a car. There's parts of our brain that are like a gas pedal, and there's parts of our brain that are like a brake pedal. A lot of our emotional parts of our brain hit the gas, and we need our prefrontal cortex here to be able to hit the brake. Say that you're walking through the mall, whatever it might be, and you see something that you want to do, you see something you want to buy. There's parts of your brain that says, yes, I want to buy that, but there's also a part of your brain that says, maybe not the best idea to buy something like that. And that is all a checks and balance that our brain stays in all the time, where we need proper amounts of gas, but equal amounts of brake with that as well. And that ties over greatly with kids in the pediatric world, and this is where a lot of impulsivity really comes from, where they see something they want to do or they want to go somewhere, where their brain just goes and does it, because the prefrontal cortex doesn't have the ability to enable that brake mechanism to say, hey, little Jimmy, is probably not the best idea to be doing that. So with that being said, you have to remember that this part of the brain is underdeveloped in a lot of kids. And this is what's going to be leading to a lot of the symptoms that you're seeing from, like we said, the impulsivity, but also emotional regulation. Another big thing that we see is focus and attention, where a lot of times your ADD, your ADHD, that is all secondary to an underdeveloped and underfunctioning prefrontal cortex. But guys, like anything in the body, it could be strengthened. With the right input, with the right repetition, we can do different therapeutic application, and we can set lifestyle up where we're able to build this part of the brain to the best of our ability, especially within some of these developmental windows. Okay, so 3 things that we could do to help to increase the function of the prefrontal cortex. So first and foremost, we have to activate the body. So everything that comes into our body from a sensory standpoint, it goes to different parts of the brain. When you touch a part of the body, it goes to your parietal lobe. When you hear something, it goes to your temporal lobe. And there's all these different sensory inputs that happen to our body pretty much every second of every day that goes to these parts of the brain, but then they have to be analyzed and they have to be thought through, and that comes from our prefrontal cortex. So our prefrontal cortex doesn't receive any sensory input, but what it does is that it interprets that sensory input. And the more that we're able to do things that helps to activate our brain, the more more it's going to be able to turn on. The more our brain turns on, the more it can then turn off. So I know that's a lot of ons and off right there, but think about it this way. One of the best things that you could do for ADHD is being active, is going outside, it's playing, it's lifting weights, it's going and playing on a jungle gym, whatever it might be. The reason why that helps so much is that we're activating the brain. The brain, especially the front part of our brain, needs to be activated to regulate everything else. So to wrap that up, activate the body. The more we activate the body, the more we activate our brain. The more we activate our brain, the better the brain can work. The more our brain works, the more inhibits in this case. So second, we have go, no, go tasks. So what's a go, no, go task? Essentially what this is it's training our brain to go towards a certain stimulus and then not go to another stimulus. So there's a couple different games out there that you guys probably already know, like things like Simon Says, like red light, green light. Things like that are really good for the prefrontal cortex. There's also different other things that you can do, like anti-saccades. So for example, if you hold your fingers up like this, you have the child look at the finger that's not wiggling, because whenever you see a stimulus, your brain goes, I want to look at that stimulus. What you're doing here is you're training the brain to say, I know there's a stimulus going on, I have to inhibit that, and I have to go to the thing that's not stimulating. And this ties over into the real world, but the more we're able to activate that off loop, that brake pedal in the brain, the more that's going to tie over into real world applications. Third, this one is very important, but is building this delayed gratification through real life applications. The world that we live in is not advantageous for developing brains. There's always these hits of dopamine from social media, from even just the world that we live in, where the brain's always seeking constant approval. It's seeking reward. And the way that we evolved from being hunter-gatherers, where there's not always these big dopamine hits that happen multiple times throughout the day. If the brain is craving this, what are you going to do? You're going to look at things like scrolling on social media. You're going to be watching movies or watching TV shows where the scenes are changing every 3 seconds, where there's constant new input that's happening to the brain. So the way that I love working through this with children is slowing them down, is not giving them these quick dopamine hits throughout the day, where if they want to do something, they have to build a process that they have to work through that gets them from point A to point B, and that point A to point B might not be the most fun thing in the world, and that's okay. But the more we're able to build this bored resistance in our brain, the more the brain has to slow down, and the more the brain realizes that it's okay if I don't have constant stimulation. Staying regulated, everything's okay. I don't have to enter this fight or flight state, compared to a kid that's bouncing off the walls where they're always seeking this new input. So slow them down, let a child be bored. So this is something that we see all the time. There's all these different symptoms that come into our clinic that we work through day in and day out. And of course, there's a different range of severity of symptoms, and each needs to be approached in a specific way. But what you have to remember is a lot of the symptoms that you're seeing, yes, they're symptoms, and yes, you want to work through those, but it's so important to take a step back and say, okay, I understand that this symptom's there. How can I make a brain and body stronger, where the stronger that the brain and body gets, the better that those symptoms in turn are going to get. So the earlier that we ultimately support these systems, the more room the brain has to grow. And that's going to tie over into just more advantageous development to be able to set children up for optimizing both their brain and their body, which will help them with success throughout their whole entire lives.